Do not sign anything tonight, Ambrose, Duke of Edgemont, said, as the orchestra stopped behind him and the chipped family brooch touched the sill beside Ursula's candle. The man who had married her sister for love stood outside her door before Ursula's own wedding feast had ended, while Crispin and 100 guests watched from the lighted ballroom. "The proof of your name is incomplete," Ambrose said, making no move across the threshold. "Give me the inquiry only if you choose to give it." Ursula tightened her hand around the brass candlestick. "Then the settlement returns to the solicitor's box, and the chapel ceremony is postponed until Chancery has ruled. It shall be done." Crispin's footsteps struck the passage before the last word faded. He stopped behind Ambrose, flushed with anger he was trying to pass off as injured dignity. "You go too far, Your Grace. The guests have eaten beneath the bride's name. To halt the music now will make her a jest throughout the county." "The meal has been served, Mr. Merton," Ursula said. "The signature has not." Beyond Ambrose's black coat, the boughs hung motionless. Every face waited for him to carry her away or for Crispin to order her back. Ambrose did neither. Ursula looked at the brooch. Beneath its chipped rim lay the folded memorandum on which she had listed every record witness and missing date. "Take the brooch, the witnesses, the jeweller's records, and the Chancery papers. Present the whole chain." Crispin made a sharp sound of protest. "I am not finished," Ursula said. "His Grace may prove my name. He may not decide what I do with it. I retain the right to refuse Wadham Court any public role attached to it, and any marriage." Ambrose looked not at Crispin, but at her. "I keep the evidence and conduct the inquiry. You keep the estate choice and every personal choice after it. And you will make no announcement before the ruling. None." The answer altered the room more completely than the stopped music. Ambrose was not claiming an heiress or stealing a bride. Ursula was assigning work she could no longer carry alone and naming its limits before witnesses who had expected her silence. She lifted the brooch and memorandum from the sill and held the packet across the threshold. Ambrose accepted it without touching her fingers. "I am postponing the ceremony," Ursula said, so the nearest guests could hear. "The settlement remains unsigned." Crispin's jaw hardened. "I control the Wadham Trust until you are of age or married. Humiliate this family tonight, and I cannot answer for what access remains to you." There it was, the threat beneath 5 weeks of invitations, menus, and hurried settlements. Crispin meant to obtain her signature before Chancery decided whether the disputed testament named her as beneficiary. The dinner could not marry her. The waiting document could still surrender the management of her future property. "Perhaps I shall regret this by morning," Ursula said. "But the regret will be mine." Ambrose turned only far enough to address the ballroom. "Miss Wadham has given her decision. The carriages may be brought round." The bows lowered. Conversation broke in frightened whispers, then in the practical disorder of guests searching for cloaks and servants. The immediate question had been answered. There would be no vows that night. The greater one had only opened. Ursula had placed the proof of her name in the hands of the man who had loved and buried her sister. Now she had to learn whether he could protect a future without beginning to build it for her. Later that night, long after the last carriage had crunched down the gravel drive and the ballroom lay dark and empty, Ursula sat at the small desk in her chambers. The silence of the house was absolute save for the ticking of the mantel clock. She had handed the central proof of her claim to Juliana's widower. Ursula pulled a fresh sheet of paper toward her. She did not write about the scandal or the looks of the guests or the heavy, complex grief that always accompanied thoughts of Juliana. She wrote a list of the south cottages that needed new thatch before the autumn rains. She calculated the orchard yields. She steadied herself with the practical routines of the estate. Ambrose had taken the verification. She would plan the household. If he failed, she would lose Wadham Court to Crispin. If he succeeded, she would have to face the terrifying prospect of possessing her own life free of any shadow. Within a week, the first test of their arrangement arrived. Ambrose rode over from his own estate, asking to see her in the library. He did not arrive with flowers or grand declarations of comfort. He arrived with her folded memorandum in his hand. He laid it on the heavy mahogany table between them. Ursula looked down. 2 items on the list had a firm, dark slash of ink through them: the solicitor's receipt of the Chancery petition and the placing of the brooch in his strong box. A 3rd item, however, had a thick cross marked beside it. "You crossed out the jeweller's testimony in London," Ursula said, her brow furrowing as she immediately leaned over the paper. "That is a critical link in the chain of provenance. The jeweller in London did not fashion the clasp." Ambrose said, his large hands resting flat on the table. "I inspected the solder under a glass. The repair to the pin is provincial work. If we waste 2 weeks hunting a London ledger, Crispin will use the delay to seek wider control of the trust." I traced the maker's punch to a London workshop. Ursula countered, her competitive instinct flaring. She hated seeing a plan altered without her knowledge. The punch marks are recorded in the 1790 registry. The puncher's London Ambrose agreed, his voice cool and maddeningly reasonable. "The repair is local. The solder seam is sloppy, mixed with too much lead. It was done in a hurry, likely in Surrey." Ursula stared at the crossed-out line. Her practical mind could find no flaw in the deduction, which irritated her further. "Then we must find the local craftsman who repaired it. I already sent inquiries to the 3 silversmiths in the county, who were operating in the year your mother lost the original pin," Ambrose said. He tapped the paper. "I am tracing the physical chain. You entrusted that inquiry to me. I entrusted you with its execution." Ursula corrected, her chin lifting. "I did not give you permission to recast the whole case without consulting me." Ambrose's lips twitched, the very faintest shadow of dry amusement breaking his stoic expression. "Next time I shall send a rider to beg your leave before I use my own eyes." A smile threatened Ursula's composure. The pleasure was not gratitude for rescue, but the rarer satisfaction of meeting a mind that pushed back with equal weight and never asked her to soften her answer. "See that you do." "Your Grace," she murmured, pulling the memorandum toward her to inspect his ink marks more closely. By the 2nd week, their rivalry and competence deepened. Ambrose returned to take her to an old jeweller's workshop in a neighboring village, having received a response to his inquiries. They travelled in his closed carriage with Ursula's maid on the facing seat and a groom beside the coachman. When they arrived, Ambrose instructed her to wait in the front room of the shop, while he went into the back to speak with the old craftsman and examine the ledgers. "I am perfectly capable of reading a ledger." Ursula objected, stepping forward. Ambrose blocked the doorway, his broad frame easily filling the space. "You gave me the verification. If you cross-examine the witness now, Crispin's solicitors will claim you coached him. Let me do the work you delegated." Ursula stopped. Her jaw tightened, but she recognized the force of his argument. If the craftsman appeared to have been prompted by her, Crispin's solicitors would attack his evidence in Chancery. "Very well," she said, forcing herself to sit on a narrow wooden chair. "But if you miss the entry regarding the lead content in the solder, I will have to go in there myself." Ambrose gave her a brief acknowledging nod and disappeared into the back room. He emerged 20 minutes later, his hands dusted with a faint trace of dark powder. "The repair was made in 1798. The ledger entry matches the sloppy lead ratio on your brooch. The chain is solid." On the carriage ride back, rain began to lash against the windows. Ursula watched Ambrose's hands resting on his knees. They were strong, capable hands, smeared with dirt from the jeweller's shop and the wheel hub. When the carriage had stopped briefly, he had climbed down to inspect the hub himself, rather than leave the matter entirely to the coachman. "You should have organized the evidence by chronological date, not by the likelihood of Crispin's objections," Ursula said, suddenly breaking the silence. She had been rearranging his notes in her mind for miles. Ambrose glanced at her water dripping from the brim of his hat. Chronology does not win a chancery suit. Structural weakness does. You reinforce the weakest joint first. Not if the foundation is out of order. Ursula argued. A judge will want the sequence from the nursery to the jeweler to the estate inventory. If you jump straight to the solder seam, you lose the narrative. I am not telling a story. I am proving a physical fact. A fact without a schedule is just a piece of metal, she retorted. The carriage lurched over a rut. Ambrose caught the leather strap above the window, and a schedule without a solid joint is just a piece of paper. Ursula opened her mouth to argue further, but the absurdity of two people arguing with such heat over the order of legal evidence in a rainstorm struck her. A short, dry laugh escaped her lips. Ambrose looked at her, and the tension in his shoulders eased. A rare, genuine smile touched his mouth, transforming his usually severe features into something strikingly warm. "Put the chronology in order if it pleases you," he said. "I will make sure the joints hold." Ursula found herself watching the warmth in his face after the smile had gone. His rank did not draw her, nor did his protection. What drew her was simpler. He did not require softness or gratitude from her. He required exactness. Over the next few weeks, the focus shifted from the legal battle in London to the physical reality of Watham Court. Crispin remained in London fighting the Chancery injunction, which gave Ursula a window of peace to walk the estate. Ambrose accompanied her. They walked the south cottages, inspecting the thatch and the mortar. Ursula carried her ledger, noting the names of the tenants and the specific repairs needed before winter. She stopped at the cottage of a widow named Mrs. Gable, promising that the roof tiles would take precedence over the plasterwork in the main house's drawing room. Ambrose stood by the cottage wall, taking a pocket-knife and digging into the mortar between the stones. He knelt in the dirt, entirely unconcerned with the state of his boots testing the crumbly sand. "The drawing-room wall will have to wait regardless," Ambrose said, standing up and wiping his blade. "This mortar is failing. If you do not shore up the structural supports here, the roof tiles will have nothing sound to rest upon." Ursula frowned, looking at her budget columns. "I planned to keep the eastern wall intact to save on stone." "The eastern wall is not sound," Ambrose said simply. Ursula walked over, took his pocket-knife from his hand and dug into the mortar herself. It crumbled easily into dust. She sighed, pulling out her pencil and scratching a hard line through her careful budget estimate. "Very well. You win the wall, but you underestimated the cost of the timber for the framing by at least 10%. Ambrose looked over her shoulder at the ledger, running one finger down the figures while his eyes narrowed. "The timber yard in the village quoted me. The timber yard in the village always quotes low and then adds a delivery fee for anything over a mile." Ursula corrected, tapping the page. "I know their accounts." Ambrose stared at the number, then took her pencil and crossed out his own mental estimate, writing her higher number in the margin. "Very well. You win the timber." They looked at each other, the ledger balanced between them, and the shared pleasure of the work hung heavy in the damp air. It was a practical joy, and wholly theirs. Later that week they opened the Blue Room, a neglected chamber on the ground floor of Watham Court that had been locked since her mother's death. Ursula wanted to use it for the tenants' harvest supper, rather than the formal, intimidating dining hall. They pulled back a damaged wooden panel near the fireplace, searching for dry rot. Inside the wall cavity, Ambrose found an old carpenter's mark, dated and initialed, matching an entry in the estate inventory Ursula had found. It proved nothing about her claim. It did, however, place one more ordinary decision back in her mother's hands, a panel repaired, paid for, and remembered. Ursula traced the initials with one finger. Her mother had not become more real through a grand portrait or a disputed inheritance. She became real through a small repair hidden behind plasterwork, completed without applause because the room had needed it. To test the room's soundness, Ursula arranged a small supper for the estate workers. She spent hours drawing a seating plan, calculating the exact placement of the tables to maximize space without blocking the hearth. During the supper, while the workers ate and talked, Ambrose stepped away from the table. He walked to the center of the room and deliberately executed a heavy stomping step of a country dance. Ursula looked up from her plate, her fork stalling mid-air. "What on earth are you doing?" "Your Grace." Ambrose did not stop. He stepped to the left and stomped again. "Testing the floorboards. If you put 40 people in here for a harvest dance, you need to know where the joists are weak." He found a soft spot near the window and pointed to it. "Do not put a table here." Ursula had to bite the inside of her cheek to stop from laughing at the sight of a duke performing a solitary jig to test floor joists. She immediately stood up, directing 2 workers to shift the tables, altering her entire seating plan at once to avoid the weak spot, yet still fitting 6 more chairs into the new arrangement. When she finished, Ambrose looked at the arrangement. "That is highly efficient." "It is," Ursula agreed, sitting again with quiet satisfaction. She ate her supper, surrounded by the workers, with Ambrose sitting across from her, his cuffs rolled up and a smudge of dust on his collar. Something warm and unsettling settled beneath Ursula's ribs. She wanted this room in use, this work worth doing, and Ambrose across the table with dust on his collar. Not as the man who had rescued her, but as the man whose company made the work itself brighter. At the start of the 5th week, Ambrose's solicitor wrote that the Chancery ruling was likely to favor Ursula within days. By the time Ambrose brought the letter to Wadham Court, he had engaged 3 teams of masons for the South cottages, hired a new housekeeper, and ordered a shipment of timber under Ursula's name. When he returned to Wadham Court to present her with the schedule, he found Ursula in the library, surrounded by ordered stacks of paper. She had not slept well in days. Although she had entrusted him with the inquiry, fear of losing her home had driven her to oversee every line of it. She had requested copies of every witness deposition from London and was comparing them line by line with her own notes, searching for any discrepancy Crispin might exploit. Ambrose laid the construction schedule on the table over her papers. "The masons arrive on Tuesday. The timber will be delivered by Thursday. Once the ruling is official, you will not lose a single day of good weather for the cottage repairs." Ursula stared at the schedule, then at the name written at the top. Miss Ursula Wadham. Her breath caught a cold spike of panic piercing the exhaustion. He had ordered men, materials, and staff. He had laid out the exact sequence of her days for the next month. She stood up her chair, scraping harshly against the wood floor. "Cancel them." Ambrose frowned confusion, tightening his features. "Ursula, the wall is failing. We agreed the cottages were the priority. I am merely ensuring the labor is secured. You built a life before I own my name." "Ursula," cut in her voice, trembling with a fierce, sudden anger. She pointed a shaking finger at the papers. "You negotiated with the timber yard. You hired a housekeeper for a house I do not yet legally possess. You took my future and decided how it should be assembled without asking me if I was ready to begin." "I am trying to protect the estate," Ambrose said, his voice sharpening. Crispin left it to rot. "You cannot manage 3 crews of masons while waiting on a chancery judge. It is my right to manage them poorly if I choose," Ursula shot back. "You are doing exactly what Crispin did, only with better materials. You are deciding what is best for me and carrying it out because you believe you know better." Ambrose stopped. The accusation hit him like a physical blow. He looked down at the schedule, then at the closely marked depositions Ursula had been scouring. "You gave me the inquiry," he said quietly, pointing to the depositions. "Yet you are sitting here starving yourself, checking every word my solicitors wrote. You told me to carry the weight, and you are still trying to hold it from underneath." Ursula swallowed hard, her anger faltering as his accuracy pierced her. She looked at the papers. She had spent 3 days verifying work he had already completed perfectly. She had treated his help not as a gift, but as a risk she had to monitor. "I was afraid," Ursula said, the admission tasting like ash. "For my whole life, whenever someone took control, I was pushed into the background. I was just Juliana's practical younger sister. If I do not control the details, I disappear." Ambrose absorbed her words in silence. He did not step forward or reach for her. The distance he kept was the first answer she could bear. He reached out, picked up the construction schedule, and tore it cleanly in half. "I will send riders to this village immediately." Ambrose said, his voice entirely steady. "I will cancel the masons. I will pay the forfeited deposits and any wages due from my own accounts. I will rescind the offer to the housekeeper. No one will set foot on Wadham land until you write the date and sign the order yourself." Ursula watched him, the tight knot in her chest unraveling slightly. He did not defend the intention. He accepted the cost of what he had done. "And I," Ursula said, her voice dropping to a quieter register, "will give you these." She gathered the stack of copied witness depositions and pushed them across the table toward him. "I will not check them again. I will not read further reports from Chancery until you bring me the final seal." Ambrose took the papers. He had surrendered the timetable of her future at a real cost. She had surrendered the papers with which she had been pretending trust while practicing suspicion. That evening, a rider brought a sealed note from the London solicitor. Ursula set it unopened beside the library key and left it there. She ate a full supper in the blue room, closed the orchard ledger before midnight, and slept until morning. When she returned, the seal remained whole. Nothing in the house had collapsed because she had not watched it. The next afternoon, they met in the blue room with the door open to the passage where Ursula's maid sorted linen within call. Afternoon light lay across the floorboards Ambrose had tested. The quarrel of the previous day had left nothing between them that could remain politely unnamed. "When the ruling comes," Ursula said, looking out the window toward the orchard, "I do not want to take on the ceremonial role of the heiress. I do not want to host seasons in London or manage the grand drawing rooms. I want the stewardship of the South cottages and the orchard accounts. I want a quiet, workable life." She turned to face him. "And I need to know why you are here, Ambrose. You loved Juliana. I know you did. But I will not continue your first marriage for you. I will not be courted as payment to her memory." "I loved Juliana," he said. "I will not diminish that love to make this easier. But she did not make me inspect mortar in the rain, merely to hear her dispute my conclusion. She did not make me look forward to being corrected over timber." He came one step nearer and stopped an arm's length away. "You do. I want the woman who corrects my figures, improves my seating plan, and insists upon owning her own life. I want you for yourself, Ursula, or not at all." For once, Ursula had no better arrangement to propose. She took the folded memorandum from her pocket and placed it in his hand. "Finish the inquiry, Ambrose. Bring me my name." Their altered terms were tested during a ball weekend hosted by a neighbouring family. Their attendance was prudent while the county waited upon the Chancery decision. Midway through the evening, the double doors of the ballroom opened, and Crispin Merton walked in. On his arm was Millicent Ormsby, a distant cousin from the northern branch of the family, and pinned to Millicent's gown was a chipped silver family brooch. A murmur rippled through the ballroom. Crispin led Millicent to the center of the floor, his voice carrying over the crowd. "I present the true heir to the Wadham Trust," he announced. "Miss Ormsby possesses the original brooch handed down directly through the primary line. Ursula's claim is a forgery. A desperate attempt to seize an estate that is not hers. I demand the immediate restoration of my management of the trust." The music stopped. The eyes of the county turned to Ursula, waiting for her to crumble, waiting for the scandal to break her. Ambrose stood 10 feet away, his hands closed at his sides, and Ursula knew that look. Now he wanted to take the brooch apart where every guest could watch him prove Crispin a liar. Then his gaze met hers. His fingers opened one by one. He did not cross to Millicent. He went instead to the host's writing table, took up a small velvet case, and carried it to Crispin without raising his voice. "You will remove that item, Mr. Merton, and place it in this box for the Chancery representative who arrives in the morning. Refuse, and he will be told that you withheld disputed evidence after presenting it in public. Deprived of the public quarrel he had expected, Crispin complied. He unpinned the brooch and dropped it into the velvet case. The whispers changed direction. Men who had watched Ursula with naked curiosity now turned their shoulders toward Crispin, and the ladies nearest Millicent drew back from the copied ornament, as though suspicion itself had passed with it. Ursula watched the exchange. Her pulse pounded in her ears. Her instinct was to snatch the box, demand Millicent's account of it, and put every witness into order herself. Her hand twitched toward the memorandum in Ambrose's pocket. But she stopped. She had entrusted him with this inquiry. She looked at Ambrose and gave him a single definitive nod. "Finish what I entrusted to you," she said. When she turned toward the doors, the guests moved without being asked. A clear path opened before her, not the passage made for a disgraced woman escaping notice, but the space accorded to someone whose refusal had begun to look wiser than the certainty of everyone who had judged it. The following morning, the two brooches lay in the estate solicitor's room, beneath the steady flame of an oil lamp. The Chancery representative occupied the head of the oak table. Crispin and Millicent sat opposite Ursula, while Ambrose stood beside the evidence box. Ursula kept her hands folded in her lap. She had given him the inquiry. If she seized it now, she had never trusted him at all. Ambrose opened Millicent's case first and examined the reverse through a jeweler's loupe. "The surface has been dulled with an abrasive," he said. "The hollows beneath the clasp have none of the wear produced by years against cloth. More important, the maker's punch belongs to a workshop that did not open until 1802. The Watham inventory records the family piece 3 years earlier." Crispin began to object. The representative stopped him with a glance and instructed Ambrose to continue. Ursula's brooch came next. Ambrose angled it toward the lamp. This pin was repaired with a lead-heavy solder used by a Surrey craftsman in 1798. His ledger records the work, the chipped edge, and the Watham servant who collected it. He laid the copied entry beside the brooch, then added the former nursery maid's sworn deposition. The woman had seen Ursula's mother place the repaired piece into a sealed packet marked for her younger daughter. The testamentary inventory described the same chip and replacement pin. An old drawing of the Watham portrait showed the brooch fastened to a heavy velvet bodice. The slight bend in Ursula's pin agreed with years of being fixed at that angle. Millicent's copy was straight newer and made from the outward design alone. Ambrose pushed the papers toward the representative. "The dates, the repair, the household witness, and the testamentary entry form one chain. Miss Ormsby's piece cannot be the original." The representative compared the marks once more. "I shall enter an interim order today suspending Mr. Merton from all management of the trust and restraining any transaction founded upon the proposed settlement. The full papers will go before the court, but I see no ground on which Miss Wadham's possession may now be displaced." Millicent's composure failed. In a broken voice, she admitted that Crispin had paid 2 of her debts and given her the copy. She had been told she need only wear it until Ursula signed. Ursula felt no triumph. Only space, quiet, unfamiliar space, where Crispin's arrangements had stood. Before the solicitor closed his book, she spoke. "I will accept recognition as beneficiary. The capital is to remain in the trust. My personal stewardship will be confined for the present to the South cottages and the orchard accounts. No London presentation is to be arranged in my name." The solicitor looked to the representative, who nodded. The choice could not settle every clause in one morning, but it entered her intention into the record before anyone else could turn victory into a new set of duties. The representative drew the velvet case containing the false brooch to his side and sealed it with the other exhibits. Crispin watched the lid close without being permitted to touch the ornament again. When Crispin and Millicent had gone, Ambrose packed the loupe and ledgers into his satchel. "The inquiry is finished," Ursula said. "It is. The order will be sealed tomorrow. Merton cannot direct the trust or revive the settlement. Then your task is finished." Ambrose finally looked at her. The promise had been fulfilled. Nothing now entitled him to remain. He bowed, took up his satchel, and left without asking to remain. That evening, Ursula returned to the dark antechamber with a single candle, while her maid waited in the adjoining sitting room. The sill was bare now. No brooch waited there, no unsigned settlement, no ballroom full of witnesses. On the small table behind her lay the orchard ledger open to the first page that bore only her authority. For one sharp moment she imagined a duke's obligations spreading across those columns. London dinners, household officers, decisions made elsewhere because his life was larger than hers. She could close the door and keep every line untouched, but Ambrose had already shown that he could tear up a schedule when she said no. Opening a door was not the same as yielding the pen. A footstep sounded in the passage. She opened the oak door. Ambrose stood outside in a plain, dark coat. He carried neither satchel nor paper. Without the work between them, he seemed less certain than he had before Chancery. "I have no task remaining," he said, "and no claim upon your house or your future." Ursula drew the door wide. "Then stay as a man who wishes to court me." She stepped across the threshold and put her hand into his. His fingers closed carefully, as though even now he would not assume more than she had offered. "I have decided," she continued, "that I want a partner who checks the floorboards before we dance." The breath left him in something very near a laugh. Ursula rose on her toes and kissed him once, briefly, deliberately, with the candle steady in her other hand. When she drew him inside, he followed because she had chosen the direction. 1 year later, the Watham Trust had survived its first full year under a separate use arrangement. Thatch on the South cottages had held through the autumn rains, the orchard accounts carried a reserve, and Ursula kept the limited stewardship she had chosen. She left London seasons to those who enjoyed them, and spent her days where an entered figure could become timber wages or a sound roof. Her courtship with Ambrose had been slow. They married in the spring, only after 3 drafts of a settlement left Watham Court and its revenues under her separate control. He had disputed 2 estimates, 1 clause, and the placement of a new orchard gate. Ursula had won all but the clause. On the night of the harvest supper, the Blue Room was crowded with tenants and warm with roasted meat, cider, and voices rising over one another. Ursula sat among them rather than at a head table, a ledger open on her lap. The door opened. Ambrose entered with dust on his boots, earth on one cuff, and a heavy wooden chair in his hand. He carried it across the room but did not set it down. Conversation faltered from table to table. 2 tenants began to rise before noticing that the Duke was carrying his own chair and appeared to expect no ceremony at all. "I estimate the floor can bear exactly 1 more chair before the joists object," he said. "Where does it go?" Ursula looked from the chair to the man holding it. He had crossed muddy fields with it, yet had waited to ask where it belonged. After a year, the question still warmed her more than any grand declaration could have done. She tapped the floor beside her own seat. "You have misjudged the load again, Your Grace, but you may put it here." Ambrose placed the chair exactly where she indicated and sat beside her. Upstairs, the chipped family brooch rested in the locked household strongbox. Downstairs, Ursula turned over the folded verification memorandum she had tucked inside her ledger. On its blank back, she had drawn that night's seating plan. Ambrose's name stood in the place she had chosen for him. The end.